For Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I rise to pursue a question that I asked in question period not that long ago, actually, on Friday, June 2nd. Now, I suppose it is June 9th, although the table still says it's June 8th, but it's a bit after midnight at adjournment proceedings. The context of my question to the Minister of Environment was that just the day before, the President of the United States had claimed he'd exited the Paris Agreement. In legal reality, which is the reality, the United States is still part of the Paris Agreement, remains legally bound by its obligations. The earliest possible date on which Donald Trump can pull the U.S. out of Paris is actually November 4th, 2020, which ironically, Mr. Speaker, is the day after the next U.S. presidential election. But there's no question that the President of the United States intended to do maximum damage to the global effort. My question to the Minister was to ask, what could Canada do to do more under the circumstances? I named some specific actions to revisit our target, which is still too weak. It's 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. That's the target that was left behind by the previous Harper administration. It's inconsistent with the Paris goals. It would not, even if we achieve that, if we achieve that target by 2030, it is insufficient to fulfill our obligations under Paris. We need to do much more if we're serious about avoiding 1.5 global average temperature increase. Now, the exciting thing that happened in the days since I asked the question, and I will return to the Minister's answer, but if anything, Donald Trump has galvanized subnational levels of government throughout the United States to commit to Paris. Ironically, his rhetorical flourish that he was elected by Pittsburgh and not Paris led to the mayor of Pittsburgh standing up, Mayor Peduto, to say, Pittsburgh's committed to Paris. Don't speak for us when you say you weren't elected by, well, you were elected by Pittsburgh. You weren't elected by Pittsburgh. We want the Paris Agreement to go forward. 211 mayors across the United States have recommitted their city governments to reducing greenhouse gases, as have more than 30 states. And just yesterday, the state of Hawaii passed the first law in the United States specifically mentioning Paris Accord and saying that Hawaii and state officials are now legally bound to come up with a treaty with plans within the state of Hawaii to meet those targets. So the answer I received from the Honourable Minister of Environment was excellent. I have to say, it was excellent. She said, if the U.S. administration is going to step back, we are going to step up. But the only specific concrete measure she suggested was that this House would debate Paris. We've already done that. We would vote on it. We know how that went, 277-1 in support of the Paris Agreement. But to meet our targets under the Paris Agreement and to play a global role that could be called leadership, we need to do much more. Setting a price on carbon is merely a foundational piece. It won't achieve even the weak Harper target. We need eco-energy retrofit programs. We need to make sure that we encourage the transition to electric vehicles far more aggressively than we're doing. We can't afford to postpone, as the government just did, our methane regulations. We need them right away. We need to do much more and faster on our infrastructure front. Money that has been reprofiled for after the next election needs to be spent sooner. In other words, what I'm hoping to get to tonight in this debate is the clear understanding that the world is not abandoning Paris. Donald Trump is not going to destroy the Paris Agreement, but without more action from governments that support it than what we've declared so far, we will not achieve our Paris targets. Canada needs to do much more than we're currently committed to doing.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the leader of the Green Party and the member for Sandwich Gulf Island for raising this important question. I think with or without the federal government of the United States, the momentum around the Paris Agreement and climate action is unstoppable. We in Canada look forward to working with many states and U.S. stakeholders and with partners and communities around the world to build these relationships while protecting the environment. I'm proud of the instrumental role we played in negotiating the Paris Agreement. Today, we are steadfast in our determination to implement our commitments through our domestic efforts, including the Pan-Canadian Framework, and through our global leadership, including through advancing the implementation of the agreement. L'engagement historique.
Canada's historic commitment to spend $2.65 billion represents the most important investment to date in our fight against climate change and illustrates, Mr. Speaker, how determined we are to act globally.
The High Ambition Coalition, we want to see more ambitious and accelerated climate action, not less. We want to move forward, not back. We want to build on the exceptional success that is the Paris Agreement and see the results, not bring the world back to discussions that took place years ago.
Canada will continue to show leadership in climate change. In September 2017, Canada will host and co-chair a ministerial meeting with China and the European Union to move the implementation of the Paris Accord forward and to encourage clean economic growth. In 2018, when we are chairing the G7, Canada will put the priority on fighting against climate change and promoting clean economic growth.
We've worked hard here at home to develop pan-Canadian solutions with provinces and territories.
In the Vancouver Declaration, the federal government and provinces and territories agreed two main things: to first implement mitigation measures for greenhouse gas emissions that would meet or exceed Canada's goal of reducing by 30% GHGs below 2005 levels by 2030, and to increase targets in order to encourage and foster more significant reductions in GHG emissions.
Our government, along with provinces and territories, put forward a comprehensive, detailed plan that shows how we will meet our emissions reductions target, a plan that the previous government always failed to deliver. Notre gouvernement a bien...
Our government has shown from the very beginning that it has set out on a path that is very different from that was taken by the Harper government, that set targets without putting in place a plan to reach them and took no measures to fight against climate change. It makes it even more difficult to reach Canada's targets, but we are determined, Mr. Speaker, to do it.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the Parliamentary Secretary for Health is here in the wee hours to debate this. But I have to say that although measures under the current Liberal government are better than what we had under the previous 9 years under Stephen Harper, they're not as good as what we had under the Right Honourable Prime Minister Paul Martin. It seems to me that if we could just dust off the 2005 budget that was put forward at that time by the minister who's now the Minister for Public Security, we'd have more climate action. We'd have eco-energy retrofits. We still have, although it was in the Liberal platform that we were getting rid of them, we still have fossil fuel subsidies. We now have seen the details on how the Pan-Canadian framework will deal with the largest polluters in those jurisdictions that don't have their own carbon price. They're getting all kinds of loopholes. We're letting Nova Scotia get away with still burning coal, and they have weaker commitments under the Pan-Canadian framework than they had before. We have to do much better. And while I applaud this government for being more on the right track than the last one, I can't, in all conscience, let them off the hook when my children and my grandchildren's future is at stake.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Monsieur le Président, je pense que...
Mr. Speaker, not only in terms of rhetoric, but in terms of action, there is a huge difference between our government and the previous government. I would just like to recall to the House and to the member that some of the actions that have been taken show that Canada is a leader in climate change. First, setting a price on pollution via carbon throughout Canada, speeding up the phasing out of coal-fired plants, crafting standards on clean fuel to encourage the use of biofuel, investing in public transit and infrastructure for electric vehicles, adopting rigorous regulations on methane emissions, and taking measures on pollutants with a short half-life. So there are many measures that we are taking that set us apart from the previous government. Our purpose is to not choose between the economy and the environment, but to go forward with both. Thank you.